What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Mind Something. If you're new here, my name is Jake, and in today's video we got a really important topic to discuss. As miners, hodling silicon or selling silicon is an extremely impactful financial decision, and I feel like the information that I'm going to cover in this video could be very beneficial for you guys. So if that kind of information is important to you, do me a favor, hit that like button, and if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. So let's get into this. So first thing that we want to talk about here is this article from the Register. China doesn't need to take Taiwan's fabs to escape US trade bans. Let's be clear about something. Even if Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, or TSMC, fell into the Chinese hands in the event of an invasion, it wouldn't do them much good. Cut off from global material supplies, intellectual property, electronic design software, and manufacturing equipment, the facilities would be essentially useless, according to Chen Ming-tong, Taiwan's Director General of National Security Bureau. While this may be reassuring thought for those concerned, China will try to take Taiwan's chip manufacturing tech by force. Such an invasion would undoubtedly be broadly catastrophic. In such an instance, Taiwan and its allies would have far bigger things to worry about than who holds the keys to TSMC's chip-making kit. Such a move would risk drawing Western nations into a protracted, painful conflict, one that the U.S. sees as a possibility on the horizon. As reported by Reuters last month, the U.S. President Joe Biden had made abundantly clear that any act of aggression by China towards Taiwan would be met with a response by U.S. armed forces. So this article goes on to talk about essentially the chip manufacturing plant doesn't do China a whole lot of good without the intellectual property, of course. They need the skilled workers there to continue the process, and without full cooperation, it just really isn't something that should be that enticing to them. So here's another article, or we'll say YouTube video, and I don't want to play this thing in fear of running into any copyright issues, but I want to read some of these things to you because this is major. So sanctions imposed by Biden prevents businesses from sending cutting-edge processors required to run efficient AI algorithms to China. The sanctions require any U.S. citizen working in the Chinese semi-industry to quit their jobs or be at risk of losing U.S. citizenship. Yeah, you heard that right. You continue to work for a Chinese semiconductor foundry, and you will lose your U.S. citizenship. And this comes right on the heels of announcing all kinds of import-export restrictions and making sure that nothing is going overseas to China. So let's continue here. The Biden administration unveiled a comprehensive strategy last week to move the U.S. forward and hold China back in its production of advanced semiconductors, virtually eliminating China's semiconductor industry overnight, escalating the high-tech battle with Beijing. Every American executive and engineer working in China's semiconductor manufacturing industry resigned yesterday, paralyzing Chinese manufacturing overnight. One round of sanctions from Biden did more damage than all 4 years of performative sanctions under the Trump administration. It goes on here to say, basically, yeah, like, these regulations are crippling the semiconductor industry in China. If you want to, you can pause as I just kind of go through these things here, but I'll read a few more. So, why did American executives resign? One of the provisions of President Joe Biden's executive order is that any U.S. citizen or green card holder working in China cannot work in the Chinese semiconductor industry or risk of losing American citizenship. So, knowing this information and what has just happened over the course of the last couple of weeks, let me remind you guys of something. If you weren't aware that this existed, Back in August, the Chips and Science Act was enabled, and essentially what this is doing is putting billions of dollars into the hands of corporations in the U.S., such as Micron, Qualcomm, Intel. There's a lot of different companies that are benefiting from this Chips and Science Act. And what they're trying to do is bring manufacturing back to the United States and cut China off from all of the intellectual property and the chips that are needed to advance their technology. Now, Intel has been the one who's been lobbying for this drastically over the last year or so. And let me point out something that they have directly on their website here. So over the course of the next 5 years, this is what kind of money is going to be awarded to these different foundries, okay? So 39 billion over the next 5 years is going to go for grants for semiconductor manufacturing and R&D. 2 billion is going to go towards research and prototyping of advanced semiconductor technology. Another 2.5 billion for semiconductor advanced test, assembly, and packaging capabilities. Another 2 billion over the next 5 years for commercialization of microelectronics R&D, and another 500 million for international support for development and adoption of secure semiconductor and supply chains, including R&D collaborations. So, yeah, Intel's getting a bunch of this money, but let's go back here a little bit. China's top memory chip maker woos local graduates for design jobs as U.S. tightens export controls. So now China is trying to entice basically any local talent, doing everything that they possibly can to get them to pick up the slack now that we've got a bunch of U.S. citizens no longer able to work there. And then also, Intel fires up internal foundry model to make its own chips. Intel has detailed plans to begin some separation between the semiconductor foundry side of its business and the design teams that create its own products. This is part of the CEO, Pat Gesslinger's efforts to revitalize the company with his integrated device manufacturing. So in a statement sent to all Intel employees, Gesslinger outlined the creation of an internal foundry model at the company intended to enable Intel's chip production facilities to service external customers on a contract manufacturing basis, as well as support the company's own internal product lines. So yeah, Intel is ramping up, and they're getting ready to do a lot of things. Next, we have one semiconductor stock down 65%. You'd wish you bought the dip. And they are talking about AMD. The 2022 stock market sell-off has been broad, but it has been particularly brutal for technology sector. While the benchmark S&P 500 index is down by 25% year-to-date as of this writing, the tech-heavy NASDAQ 100 index has lost 34%. But when you zoom out and compare their performance over the past 5 years, this picture looks very different. The NASDAQ 100 is up by 77%, which is nearly double the S&P's 500 gain of 40%. This supports the widely held view that investing for long-term typically delivers the greatest benefits. Investors could apply this strategy to semiconductor stock AMD, which has declined by over 65% from its all-time high. Semiconductors continue to grow rapidly in importance, and the sector could be worth as much as $1.5 trillion annually by 2030. AMD is a best-in-class producer and one that investors should consider buying now. So, moving on. China's top chip tool maker directs U.S. engineers to suspend work. So Beijing Nora Microelectronics Technology Company, China's biggest semiconductor production equipment maker, this week asked its U.S. engineers to stop working on research and development projects. The company made the move in compliance with recent restrictions imposed by the U.S. government on the Chinese high-tech sector. So yeah, one article after another basically saying that these sanctions are basically just killing the relationship between the US and China when it comes to chip manufacturing. Next, let's take a look at this. Intel wins US government project to develop leading edge foundry ecosystem. The US Department of Defense, through the NSTXL consortium based whatever, has awarded Intel an agreement to provide commercial foundry services in the first phase of its multi-phase rapid assured microelectronic prototypes. The RAMP-C program was created to facilitate the use of US-based commercial semiconductor foundry ecosystem to fabricate the assured leading-edge custom and integrated circuits and commercial products required for crucial Department of Defense systems. Intel Foundry Services, Intel's dedicated foundry business, launched it this year, will lead the work. So not only is it basically an arms race to get chip manufacturing done locally, whether that's in the US or China, but they also want to make sure that anything that's used for the military is not manufactured overseas. So what does that tell you? Obviously, situations are escalating and they are preparing for potential conflict. We can't have proprietary information in the hands of the enemy. So moving on, Intel is planning thousands of job cuts in the face of the PC slump. Chip maker may announce move around time of its earnings report. Company-wide cuts will hit sales and marketing especially hard. So they're cutting jobs for sales and marketing specifically. Why would they be doing that? Well, in the face of what's happening with the macroeconomic situation, I don't think that they expect their typical average American home to be buying PC parts in droves because, let's face it, inflation is out of control. But what they are concerned about is making sure that they can build chips for the military. Next, Intel's multi-billion-dollar bait and switch. Just a couple of months after Intel's multi-million-dollar lobbying effort succeeded in winning microchip company billions of dollars in no-strings-attached corporate subsidies, Intel is reportedly planning to lay off thousands of workers. The potential layoffs come only weeks after the company announced a shareholder dividend at the same rate as the previous few quarters, amounting to a total of $6 billion in annual dividends. The sequence of events confirms warnings about the so-called CHIPS Acts from vanishingly small number of critics who cautioned that without changes, the legislation would let companies use the money to finance payouts to wealthy investors and would not obligate the companies to expand their investments in domestic jobs. And yet those critics were ignored by politicians and pundits of both parties eager to shovel federal money to a handful of powerful tech companies. Indeed, when Senator Bernie Sanders attempted to attach conditions to those subsidies, including a ban on stock buybacks, a cap on executive pay, a government equity stake, and union neutrality provisions, he was thwarted by Democratic leaders. At the time, Democrats blocking Sanders' initiative were bolstered by Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, who insisted that if the legislation did not pass immediately, the company would move forward overseas and hold up already planned investments. And then we have chip fabs are coming to the US, but will there be enough skilled workers? Intel, TSMC, Samsung, and other global companies are planning chip fabs in the US in coming years. While billions of dollars will go for those high-tech plants and their equipment, questions remain. How will companies fill the needed jobs? There are currently about 102,000 semiconductor and circuit manufacturing employees in the US. The chip plants will each require thousands of workers. Samsung recently announced plans for a $17 billion chip plant in Texas to open in 2024 with 2,000 high-tech jobs. Then we also have TSMC to build a $12 billion advanced semiconductor plant in Arizona with the government support. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, the world's largest contract semiconductor foundry, said that it plans to build an advanced chip foundry in Arizona with the support of the state and the United States federal government. The announcement follows Wall Street Journal's report earlier this week that White House officials were in talks with TSMC and Intel to build foundries in the U.S. as part of its effort to reduce reliance on chip factories in Asia. So, last article here, chip manufacturer Micron to build $20 billion New York factory amid semiconductor boom. Tech giant Micron said it will invest $20 billion in new chip factory in upstate New York, up to $100 billion over 20 years if it decides to expand. Another sign of a domestic semiconductor manufacturing boom. So what does this information translate to you and me as miners? Well, to me, it's telling me a couple of things. Number one, the prices of GPUs, semiconductors, chips, all of these different things are in jeopardy. In the short term, I don't think that prices are going to continue to drop. I think we're going to continue and experience a shortage on these types of products because of everything that's going on. Now, also what this means is the U.S. is very focused on chip manufacturing taking place in the United States. So long term, this is going to be very good for the industry. It should make things less expensive, and it's probably a good thing as a whole. However, it does present some very challenging situations with China. The moves that we're making now are not going to be taken lightheartedly, and there will be repercussions for what the Biden administration is doing right now. So, to speculate on what I think is going to happen going forward, I do think that GPU prices will continue to dip as we get the newer generation cards from NVIDIA and AMD, and also we have Intel competing now. But that's very, very short term, guys. I'm talking about from maybe now through first quarter of next year, or maybe second quarter. But, in the midterm, let's say from February over the course of about the next year or so, I do expect GPUs to hold their pricing pretty well. Now, long term, we're looking at 2025 to 2030. I do think that the prices of GPUs will start to come down drastically as we're able to manufacture these things locally, provided that we don't go into some major catastrophic events leading into conflict with China. So stay tuned, and I will keep you guys updated. And if you like this type of content, do me a favor, hit that like. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, and I will keep you guys informed. Until then, I'll catch you on the next one. I'm out.